Radio Cardiff 98.7.
Good afternoon. You're listening to a News, Views and Interviews special here on Radio Cardiff 98.7 FM. I'm Jane Morris. Now, this special today is all about IPP. That's the Indeterminate Sentence for the Protection of the Public. Now, a couple of months ago, an amazing, resourceful, determined, strong woman called Shirley contacted me about her son, Sean Lloyd. This is her story.
Hi, my name is Shirley Tabono and I'm campaigning against the Indeterminate Sentence for the Protection of the Public, known as the IPP. The IPP sentence was brought out in 2005 to keep rapists, paedophiles, terrorists and the more serious offender at the top end of the scale that would have committed a crime that warranted 8 years or more. My son Sean Lloyd, when he was just 18 years of age, he went out with a friend and he committed street robbery. He didn't cause particular harm or injury where they used blows or beat the people up, but I don't condone what Sean did. What he did was wrong and he did deserve to go to prison. Sean was sentenced to 2.5-year tariff. However, the IPP was added. I had no idea what the IPP was, Sean didn't have no idea what the IPP was, and the barrister had no idea what the IPP sentence was. Hence, Sean was told not to appeal his sentence as he got off lightly. This was in January the 13th, 2006. Sean is 26 now in August, and he's into his 8th year of this IPP sentence. The IPP sentence comes with no date of release, leaving Sean in limbo, the whole family in limbo, and it has torn our family apart.
Your son, he had a co-accused in the robbery. Why did they get different sentences?
The reason they both had different sentences, when Sean was young, we had his uncle living with us who was dying of cancer and died in the house. After that, I felt like I'd done all the caring and my marriage to my husband of 25 years broke down. I left the family home and the children decided to stay living with their dad. I think all this had a detrimental effect on Sean's well-being, hence he started to get into a bit of bother with the police. Example, if you left your bike outside the shop, Sean would take it. It was petty crime, that sort of petty crime. The other boy that Sean committed the street robbery with had never been in trouble with the police before. So when they both went to court for the street robbery, the other boy was given 18 months and he was out released after 9 months on tag. Sean was given 2.5 years with the IPP sentence added. I've campaigned over the years to get the IPP sentence abolished, along with other campaigners, and we succeeded. It was abolished on the 3rd of December 2012. However, they never abolished it retrospectively for those still serving it, hence Sean is still in prison. Sean has shown remorse for what he's done. He's had 8 years to look back over what he's done. He's shown remorse. He's really sorry. He hopes that the people that he did attack have got on with their lives and living a normal life again. Sean has had courses to complete whilst on this IPP sentence and has completed all the courses, anger management, thinking skills, all these sorts of courses that they give you. He also went on to do English and maths and got so high in them that he could go no further. So he has tried within the system, but as I said, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. When paroles come, the goalpost get moved every time. So it's just never ending. The sentence just goes on and on and on. And he's also been told now that his next parole in November, he's not going to win it.
Why have they told him that?
He broke prison rules. He's been in a long time. He's broke a couple of prison rules. If a normal prisoner with a determinate sentence breaks a prison rule, they'll have their TV took off them, they'll have their radio took off them, and they'll have their earnings confiscated and for about 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then they'll have them back, but they still know they're going home. If an indeterminate prisoner breaks a prison rule, they lose all their privileges the same as, but when it comes to the parole, they have to justify to the parole board why they broke these rules, and then the parole board then will recommend more courses and keep them in prison longer.
Right.
That will be another year for the following parole.
When Sean was initially sentenced in the court and he was told he had the 2.5-year tariff, I'm assuming your understanding and his understanding was that it was just like an ordinary prison sentence. At the most, he'd be there for 2.5 years, and then as long as he behaved himself, he'd be out at the end of that. Well, none of you understood what the IPP was. What actually happened to Sean when he got to the prison?
When Sean was first sentenced to the IPP, he was taken to Park Prison in Bridgend. He was called to the Governor's office and he was told, Sean, do you realise you are detained for life? You will never be released from prison and that you will die in prison.
And he was an 18-year-old boy at
He
this
was an
point.
18-year-old boy at the time when he was told this. He phoned me up and his words were, Mama, you got to help. They're never letting me out of prison. He was in a state, he was depressed. I got in a state and I'm saying, Sean, it can't be right. I'll sort it out. I'll go see a barrister in the morning first thing. I did go to see the barrister first thing. This document that I have in my hand right now, a copy of this document where it states Sean was to be detention for life, was taken back to the Crown Court. It was amended on the 4th of February 2006. But it was still some 4 weeks after that again before me and Sean got the news that it was a written mistake. This written mistake has been taken lightly by the authorities, by the government, by the prison service. But for me and Sean, it was devastating news. Could Sean have physically harmed himself knowing that he was never going to be released from prison? Could my son have killed himself in prison during that 8 weeks?
So did the prison authorities look after your son in that period, look after his mental health? Because you can imagine anyone as an adult thinking, OK, I've done wrong, I accept that, done the crime, I'll do the time, fair enough. First thing you hear is, no, actually, you're here for the rest of your life. Now, as a grown-up adult, that would be devastating. But for an 18-year-old, I mean, sure, that has got to have affected his mental health.
I think it did. I think it affected the way that he's progressed through the system. I think this document had, and still has, a big impact on the way Sean would have behaved in prison. And I also believe that this document has stopped him from progressing through the system. Nobody ever went to Sean's cell and asked him how he was coping with the news. And my son never got no help whatsoever.
Gosh, because the prisons do have a duty of care, don't they, for the health of prisoners?
This is my argument. They do have a duty of care, but because of the mix-up of this IPP sentence, which was meant for the more serious criminals like rapists, terrorists, paedophiles, I don't think that the justice system, all through the system, knew what the IPP sentence was about. I don't know where to go with this any further. I've done everything I can. I've now sent this document off to the European Court of Human Rights because Sean absconded in March this year from Prescoid Open Conditions. He was being bullied by Indeterminate prisoners there into holding a phone in his cell. IPP prisoners are put in a catch-22 situation where if you don't hold this phone in my cell for me, then I will put you in a situation where you will get an adjudication. So hence Sean's thinking, I'll take the chance and hide your phone. He knows he broke a prison rule, but if he didn't hide the phone, he would still break a prison rule because he would have been put in a terrible situation. That is the nightmare of it all. And how on earth can the justice system make a terrible mistake like that and mess with my boy's head and ignore my letters to them and close in this document and I never get an answer? I want an answer. I want an apology to my son. I think he deserves an apology because he has never been right since he received this news. He had 8 weeks of his head being gone, thinking he's never going to get out. And this is why he hasn't progressed through the system. I blame the document.
Yeah, he's still in a position whereby he doesn't know if he will get out.
He doesn't. After absconding from Prescoid Prison and he handed himself in to Roath Police Station, he was taken to Cardiff Prison. That's the first time Sean, in all the 8 years of served time, apart from his first year in Park in Wales, he served his time in Wolverhampton, in Aylesbury, God knows where, as far as Lincolnshire, which makes visits totally impossible for me to have regular contact with him. And we were under the understanding that Sean would remain in Cardiff prison until his parole in November. However, without notice, the prison service came to take him last week back to Featherstone in Wolverhampton. Sean refused to be moved. Right. I think, again, they've messed with his head. I think they should have given him notice. They should have got him prepared for it. They didn't, and he refused to be moved. Sean, at the moment, is on a segregation wing indefinitely until they find a prison to accept him. Featherstone is refusing to accept him now because they haven't got the space there.
So why can't he stay in Cardiff?
I don't know why he can't remain in Cardiff. He'd settled in Cardiff prison. He had a good rapport with his offender supervisor. And everything just seemed to be fine until the day they come to take him back to Featherstone. And it's all gone AWOL again. And because this has happened, when Sean gets his parole in November, he's going to be kept in prison for another year after that.
There's going to be people out there who are going to say, well, you know, he shouldn't have broken the law. He wouldn't be in this position if he hadn't have done that.
Exactly, and I totally agree. I don't condone what Sean done. What Sean done was wrong. He did deserve to go to prison, be it 2.5 years, be it 5 years, be it 10 years. Please give my son a date of release. My boy's done 8, and he ain't no paedophile, he ain't no rapist, he ain't no murderer, he ain't no terrorist. He made a big mistake when he's 18 years of age, and please God, give me my son back. Give him a chance to get some of his life back and be able to come back into the community, get himself a job, settle down and start to live a normal life.
There's approximately 3,000 prisoners affected by this IPP sentence now. How many of them are actually getting released?
It was brought out in 2005, abolished in 2012. There's more being released now the last, say, 2 years, but that's because they've been in prison for a long time and they have to start releasing them. Of this, say, 6,500, whatever it may be that's in there, if the sentence was given out properly, today there may only be 200 people serving an IPP sentence.
Right.
There would only be about 200 that would have deserved that sentence.
Right. So basically they were giving out IPPs to people, this is judges now, without really understanding who actually deserved it.
Yeah, I genuinely believe the judge, Gerald Price, when he sentenced Sean to 2.5-year tariff and added the IPP, I genuinely believe that Gerald Price thought he was putting Sean on a rehabilitation course. That's
right.
what I thought it was, a rehabilitation course. Now, Sean has been in prison for 8 years on his IPP. The system has failed him because they've had 8 years to rehabilitate him and they still haven't rehabilitated him from their point of view. That's why they're keeping him in.
And the only way to get out is to get past this parole board then?
You need to get past the parole board. You have to tell the parole board that I've done all my courses, I've behaved myself, I've been good, and I think I'm ready for release. But it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. How can a prisoner prove that he's safe to be let out, that he's rehabilitated, unless he's actually let out? But Sean has done his time 3 times over.
Even going through that, it's understandable that it's going to be increasingly more difficult for him to obey the rules, if you like, because the rules seem so arbitrary and unfair.
As I said, if you do the crime, you do the time. And if you're in prison, you have to obey the rules. They're there to keep the calm within the prisons. And I agree with that. There has to be rules. But these rules will be broken. My concerns is there's no equality between an indeterminate sentence prisoner and a determinate sentence prisoner.
In an ideal world, what would you have happen?
At the beginning of his sentence, for him to have a determinate sentence with a date of release. That didn't happen. Right now, I think there should be a review of every IPP sentence. I've never come across a case like Sean, and I've been on the campaigns where somebody have done a street robbery, not committed no particular harm or injury, not beat them up. If Sean was to commit the crime today, since this has been abolished, Crown Prosecution Service Guidelines recommends a prison sentence of between 12 months and 3 years. So while this has been abolished, Sean have seen people coming in prison, committing the same crime, getting sentenced to 12 months and leaving the system, and he's still stuck in.
What's the next step then? Is it the European Court of Human Rights? Is that the next step for you?
The reason why I've written to the European Court of Human Rights now is when Sean absconded from prison, obviously he had to go to Crown Court, he was charged with absconding, and I wrote a letter to the judge explaining to the judge how long Sean's been in prison, that I think he's lost in the system, the prison system has swallowed up his youth, asking for leniency in the sentencing. And in with this letter, I enclosed the document where it stated Sean was sentenced to detention for life. This is the first time somebody has listened to me. The judge recommended, along with his own letter that he is writing to the prison service and to the probation service, that my letter, along with the document that I enclosed, stating detention for life, must go on the top of Sean's file and someone must take notice. It's only since then that I can write to the European Court of Human Rights, which I've done.
So are you waiting to hear back from them then?
I'm hearing to wait back from them, yeah. As far as I'm concerned, for anyone to go into one's cell or call him to the governor's office and say, Sean, you are not going to never be released from prison, you are going to die in prison, to receive such news is inhumane and cruel.
Ken Clarke himself, when he abolished the IPP, he himself stated that it was inhumane, yet they didn't abolish it retrospectively, did they?
No, they didn't. I think they're afraid to abolish it retrospectively because they're afraid there'll be compensation claims, because there are 3,500 now over their tariffs. And I think that is the problem there. Money's not an issue. I don't want money, Sean don't want money. He wants his life back. Just his life back.
Absolutely.
And I don't see why they can't have a review of the sentencing and give him a determinate sentence and free him. And free him on a licence more suited to the crime that they committed. So they will still be into the probation service. If they step out of line, they're going to be recalled straight away. Because with this IPP sentence, if Sean was to be freed tomorrow, he is on a life licence.
Right.
The licence will be till the day he dies. So for the rest of his life, he cannot break a rule in a community. He can't go through a red light. If he forgot to tax his car, he could be recalled to prison. If he misses an appointment with his probation officer, he can be recalled to prison. Say he was out in the forest and he peed in a bush, he could get recalled for a year for that, where somebody else would go to court and get a fine. So he's facing prison for the rest of his life, even if he were freed.
So basically you need to get the IPP removed, whatever happens.
It's got to be removed.
Yeah.
It's been removed for future IPPs. It's got to be removed now. It's a stain on our British justice system. It's a barbaric sentence, inhumane sentence, to lock anyone up and throw away the key. That's what they've done. It's a life sentence through the back door. Politicians and some of the lords, they're on my side, bringing this up in debate or bringing it up in the Lords and the Commons all the time. But the government needs to listen.
Once you found out what the IPP was, why didn't you appeal the sentence then?
The first I found out what the IPP was, when Sean's 2.5 years had passed and he wasn't coming out. And I thought, oops. He had to wait another year for another parole hearing. And I'm like, perhaps you'll get out next year then, Sean. But I started looking up on Google the IPP sentence then, because I had no idea what it was. And there was so much information on it, I still didn't know what it was. I couldn't talk to no one about it, because nobody else knew what it was. We didn't even have a prison law solicitor then. And it was only till then that I realised, God, we need a prison law barrister. Just didn't know what it was all about, didn't know where to go for help, didn't know who to write to. The information that I was getting on it took about 3, 4, 5 months to sink into my head. I just could not get around it. Because the more you read into it, you realised it was a life sentence through the back door. And every time the paroles were coming and going, it became more realistic that it is a life sentence through the back door.
So it's not an option to appeal the sentence then?
No, we've tried to appeal the sentence. But at the time it was given, it was lawful, so we cannot appeal the sentence. I've tried so hard to get Sean a judicial review of his sentence, but you can't get the legal aid for it. So we're stuck in limbo. There's just no way out of it till the government realises that it is a stain on our British justice system. The public don't know about IPP sentence.
No.
The government want it brushed into the carpet. It's hard to get the news or newspapers or anyone to take this story on.
OK then, well that was Shirley's story, and we have got Shirley in the studio with us today, and we'll be having a chat and a bit of a catch up on what's happening with Sean a little bit later on in the show. Now Shirley's Assembly member Jenny Rathbone has been incredibly supportive for Shirley in her campaign, and I had a chat with Jenny about what she thinks about IPP. I'm joined by Assembly member for Cardiff Central Jenny Rathbone. Hello Jenny.
Hi.
How did you first get involved with IPP?
Well, Shirley Lloyd contacted me to try and get me to help her with the desperate situation she was facing with her son, who's been in prison for over 7 years and has more than served his sentence. But because he was one of the guinea pigs who were caught by this indeterminate sentences for public protection, he has yet to be able to convince the system that he's ready to leave prison, even though he's actually served, well, more than served, the index offence that he originally committed. I mean, this was a law that was originally designed to capture people who've committed very, very serious offences like murder. But for some reason, the courts then used it to slap indeterminate sentences on all manner of people, including people like Sean, he'd obviously done something really stupid, but it was not in any way serious like murder is. The numbers were never due to be more than 1,000 people across the country, and they've grown every single year. More than 1,000 people are given these indeterminate sentences, and there's now over 6,000 people waiting in prison with no idea whatsoever of when and if the state is ever going to release them.
You used the word guinea pig there. That seems quite a strong word to be used in relation to a law of the land.
Yeah, but you have to remember that this law is at the discretion of the judges who pass sentences. And originally it was meant for people who'd committed very serious offences like murder. And unfortunately the courts have interpreted this to cover anybody who comes before them for a repeat offence. And this was the case with Sean. He, as a child, he was convicted of an offence he says he didn't commit. And then when he was brought before the courts again for a street burglary, they took the attitude that, well, he hadn't learnt the lesson of being in prison the first time round, and therefore he shouldn't be allowed out until such time as he could prove that he was never going to offend again. Now, that is a bit like the length of a piece of string. It's really difficult to imagine what it'd be like for somebody to be in prison and have absolutely no idea when they might be released. Because most people have a really clear idea. They've been given so many months or years, and if they behave well, they'll be out by such and such a date. And that's a huge incentive to them to behave well. But this has been entirely inappropriately used, this legislation, by the courts. So, for example, there was one individual who was sentenced to 71 days, but because it was an indeterminate sentence, he's still in prison 5 years later. You know, even the Home Secretary at the time, David Blunkett, admitted that the IPPs were not envisaged to be used for this sort of situation. And I have to give credit to Ken Clarke, who bit the bullet when he was the Justice Secretary and passed the legislation to abolish IPPs. So there are no new people coming forward. But this has left all the individuals who were caught up with these indeterminate sentences currently in prison in legal limbo, because the legislation didn't take account of what would happen to the people who'd already been given these indeterminate sentences.
Now, I know that you're an Assembly member and not a Member of Parliament with the power to legislate across the UK, but why do you think, if Ken Clarke felt so strongly that he got rid of the IPP, why do you think they didn't include in that legislation an option to, at the very least, review all historic uses of the IPP sentence? Well,
clearly the legislation should have addressed this issue, but it didn't. There's lots of bad legislation around, and that's, I'm afraid, when legislators aren't paying enough attention. And unfortunately, criminal justice isn't something that attracts a huge number of people's interests. But it should do, because a huge amount of public money is spent on keeping people in prison. It costs over £40,000 to keep people in prison. And if we're keeping people in prison unnecessarily, that's money we can't be spending on something else. The prison population has grown enormously, and the prisons are overcrowded, and prisoners are certainly not getting the courses that they need to enable them to prove that they are now fit to return to the community. I mean, many of the people who are in prison, we have to understand, are illiterate, have mental health problems, have been abused as children, and in many senses the prisons are acting as the service of last resort for such people. And if the services are overstretched, they have very little chance of being able to truly address people's needs. That doesn't mean to say people shouldn't go to prison if they've done something wrong, although, in my view, there are too many people going to prison who are not a risk either to themselves or the community, and they need to have there needs to be much better use of rigorous and ruthless community sentences to enable people to pay back to society in a different way. But the more people we have in prison, the more resources we're having to spend on them. And unless we have a really good strategy for educating and engaging with prisoners to enable them to address the reasons why they were in prison in the first place, we are going to always have this revolving door. But in the case of these individuals, there isn't even the revolving door. They're just being kept inside, and that in itself is really getting in the way of their rehabilitation.
Shall we talk a little bit about the campaign now? Because they're coming to the Assembly very soon to, well, make their presence felt. So, and obviously you know about it, but maybe let the rest of the Assembly members know what's going on. What's your involvement in the campaign?
Well, there's no doubt that Shirley Lloyd is an amazing organiser, because she last year she organised a delegation of residents, mainly from Adamstown, to go down to Parliament to hand in the petition that Shirley had collected signatures for in Downing Street. And I accompanied her and some of her family members to hand in the petition at Downing Street, after which they went down to the House of Commons to try and lobby their MP. Unfortunately, Jenny Willett, who is Shirley Lloyd's MP, refused to see her, which was very disappointing. But I hope that other people got to see their MP and explain why they were so concerned and, you know, took the day off work in order to come and lobby both the government and the Parliament. And I think that because the legislation has dealt with any new people coming along getting these indeterminate sentences, there is a real danger that the people who are already locked up with these indeterminate sentences will be forgotten, because there really isn't a way forward for them, because the rehabilitation courses they need to do in order to be able to, you know, prove that they are now ready to leave are in many, many cases not available. And that is a direct abuse of their human rights, which is why roughly a year ago, the European Court of Human Rights actually awarded £6,500 to 3 prisoners on indeterminate sentences because of the arbitrary and unlawful breach of their human rights, because they'd never actually been given a realistic chance of proving that they could now qualify for release. And that's because in many local prisons these rehabilitation courses simply don't exist.
So you mentioned 3 prisoners there who went to the European Court of Human Rights. Are they still in prison, or were they released?
As far as I'm aware, they are still in prison because the government is now appealing the process, and it's a very lengthy business. Not to say expensive as well. It was very disappointing that the government didn't just put up its hands and say that's absolutely right. As far as I'm aware, these people are still in prison a year later.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, OK, the cynic in me is saying, I suppose the government are going to appeal it because there's another 6,000 people in prison under the same sentences, and they're not going to want to pay compensation to all of them.
Well, that's a question you'd have to put to the government. But, of course, there are many other people who have been denied access to courses, even if they are in prisons where these rehabilitation courses are being run. And they include people with learning difficulties, people with psychiatric problems who are deemed to be unable or too emotionally unstable to access these courses successfully, those people are absolutely in a position where they could be spending the rest of their life in prison for having committed a minor offence.
Gosh, that's pretty stark, isn't it?
It is, indeed. It's absolutely, well, it's a scandal. And that is why I feel the government has a duty to look at this, and Parliament has a duty to ensure that the government does address this problem.
Mm-hmm.
The lobby that's coming to the Assembly is obviously as a way of publicising this issue and the injustice that is being done to these people. But clearly the criminal justice system is not devolved in Wales, and the National Assembly and the Welsh Government do not have jurisdiction over the criminal justice system. It is absolutely the job of Parliament and the UK government to address this matter.
But is there anything that the Welsh Assembly government can do? Can the Welsh Assembly government put pressure on the UK Parliament?
The Welsh government has rather limited capacity to influence this situation because prisons' budget is outside our remit. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the education service provided to prisoners is devolved to the Welsh Government. So that might be one way in which we could address it. So I will hope that Jeff Cuthbert is prepared to come along and talk to Shirley Lloyd and the other people who want to raise this matter, because it is just possible that he will be able to at least have a discussion with the prison service on this to make sure that those courses are available for those who need to access them.
We're talking about these courses. Is there a set number of these courses that they have to complete before they are considered fit to return to society?
Yes. Well, there are these courses, and then there are the assessment of the prison officers who are in charge of the particular prisoner while they're in prison. And obviously, unfortunately, that is open to abuse if prison officers were to be tempted to bully an individual. Then it does leave a lot of power in their hands if they know that the prisoner, without their say-so and them speaking up on their behalf, are going to remain in prison. That in itself is not a satisfactory situation.
Mm-hmm. And of course the other prisoners know exactly who has the IPP as well.
Probably.
I think Shirley mentioned that there was also a problem with bullying of other inmates as well for prisoners with IPP. So how do you see the way forward? I mean, we're talking about an individual case here, but like we mentioned, there are literally thousands of prisoners affected by this. How do you see it resolving itself?
Well, often the families of prisoners are people with not very many resources, by the very nature that they're family members in prison. So clearly one of the ways in which people can address this issue is to ask their MP to look at it. And if individual families find it difficult to do that sort of thing on behalf of their family member, then it's up to other people like some of the criminal justice charities, the Howard League for Penal Reform, who I know have done a lot of work on this issue, to speak up on the behalf of the prisoners and not least their families. You have to remember that there are children of these people who are suffering as a result of this legal limbo.
You're listening to a News, Views and Interviews special on IPP on Radio Cardiff 98.7 FM. Now, over the last few weeks, I have done quite a bit of research into IPP, including reading extracts from Hansard. That's the written record of everything that is actually said in both houses of Parliament, as it seems it will take Parliament to sort out the situation. Lord David Wigley has asked a few questions in the House of Lords about IPP. This is what he had to say to me. I'm joined on the line now by David Wigley, who is a member of the House of Lords. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you tell me your interest in IPP, that's the indeterminate sentences for the protection of the public?
I've been in the second chamber in Westminster the last couple of years. I'd been in the House of Commons for 27 years before that. But during the time I was away, these sentences, the IPP sentences, had come through and were regarded as totally unsatisfactory ones, that they weren't delivering as they should, and that they were unfair, that prisoners should have knowledge of the length of sentence that they are to serve before they can be reviewed, and to have some indication of the chances and the mechanisms for being released. Now then, the dissatisfaction with the present situation led to a change in legislation, and since last December 2012, IPP sentences have not been applied to new cases. But the problem has been for those who are in the system, who are already with indeterminate sentences, and who are wanting to know when they would be reviewed, when they would be out, and just having no indication at all. And if I can give you some indication, there's about 5,600 prisoners in this situation. Of those, some 3,500, over half them, had sentences of less than 4 years, and 3/4 of those have had their tariff, the date they're expected to be reviewed and released by, that has passed. 3/4 have passed their tariff date and still don't know where they stand. It's a very unfair situation.
Mm-hmm. For these prisoners who have the IPPs, they have to complete rehabilitative courses.
Yes, indeed.
They're not always available for them to take.
That is part of the problem. There should be rehabilitation and resettlement courses available. Those are organized by the prison and by the parole service together. But apparently there is just a lack of resources for these courses to be made available. So you get the prisoners in a catch-22 situation. They don't know when they're going to come out, and they need a course in order to do so, but they can't have access to the course because the resources aren't there to make them available. And this has been dragging on now for a year, 18 months, since we've known that the old system was coming to an end, and these 5,000 or 6,000 prisoners really must have their cases reviewed. And unless the system can discover the resources necessary for the courses, then some alternative assessment has to be made. It's absolutely understandable that those who might be a risk to society need to be reviewed before they're released. That goes without question. But the vast majority of cases of IPP prisoners don't fall into that category.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that IPPs weren't necessarily used correctly by judges when they were passing sentence?
Well, the judges had that available to them under the law of the land, and it's not the judges' fault for using the law of the land as Parliament had passed it for them. I think what was wrong and what is now recognised is that Parliament shouldn't have passed such systems of sentencing. But having done so, you're landed in a position where there are individuals, there's some... I've had some cases drawn to my attention of people who have just been sentenced perhaps for a couple of years in prison, and now 6 or 7 years down the road and still haven't been released or given an indication when they're going to be released.
Mm-hmm. I understand that the Lord Chancellor has powers under Section 128 of the 2012 Act to vary the release test.
Yes, there are powers, and there seems to be a bit of an impasse on the parliamentary level here, that the powers are not being used in the way that they might possibly be used. I don't think these powers were intended as a blanket solution, to be fair with the Lord Chancellor. I think they were more intended for individual cases. But when you've got a situation with thousands of people locked up indefinitely without any indication of when they're coming out, then clearly there has to be a mechanism. My feeling is that we should now be making retrospective the changes that were introduced last December, and that the old IPP sentences should just be ended. Some review undertaken as to whether there's any danger of violence from some of the prisoners, a minority of the prisoners that are held under IPP, but for the vast majority, that they can know that they are going to be released and that the steps are taken to do so.
I mean, that actually sounds like the sensible thing to do, but what will it take to achieve that?
Well, I think it'll take parliamentary pressure in both chambers, and that means not only those of us that sit on opposition benches, I'm on the cross benches in in the House of Lords, but those also on government benches. I know there'll be many members of Parliament and peers, both in the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrat Party, who are uneasy about the situation. Several have expressed those feelings to me. Now, then I believe they need to raise their voice as well. And in both chambers now, when we reconvene next month after the recess, we need to get debates going in both chambers in order to put pressure on government for action.
Mm-hmm. When the IPPs were abolished, why wasn't there a retrospective review of those under that sentence as part of that act?
I think the reason was that IPP prisoners have a certain degree of a question mark as to at what stage would they be regarded as being rehabilitated and coming out. And the intention was that they would have the courses which would review their progress and whether they were seen as fit to be coming out. And that's fine, provided that you had the courses on stream. Mm-hmm. So that the system wasn't necessarily wrong in those terms, provided that all aspects of it were working. But unfortunately, they haven't for the reasons that I've given. And that's why now I think there isn't much choice but to go back and say, right, we can't cope with this. We've got to find a quick mechanism for reviewing these cases and for these people to have a date, an early date, hopefully in many cases, when they'll be out.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that for these prisoners who, for all intents and purposes, are left in limbo, they've completed their sentence but they're still in prison because of the IPP, do you think it will have a detrimental effect on these prisoners and how they are rehabilitated back into society?
Well, there's a real danger of this. There's a danger of hopelessness growing, and there have been concerns expressed about some prisoners being suicidal, and you can understand that when they get year after year, they just don't know where they stand. And then there's also the question, well, if there is a problem, what courses, what treatment is available to try and help them overcome this? Now, then one has to have either or there, otherwise you're leaving people languishing without really being covered by appropriate provisions of the law, sentence them because of what they've done, not holding them because of what they might do. In extreme cases where there's violence or danger of murder and that sort of thing, of course you can't let prisoners out where there's a risk. But the overwhelming majority are relatively small. I'm not saying they're trivial, but they are short sentences. We're talking about 2 or 3 year sentences, and they should not be put in this position. And what's more, what happens is then, if they're allowed perhaps out on a trial basis, the frustration that they're feeling may lead to them breaking rules under those circumstances, and then the whole system going back to the square one. This just isn't acceptable. Sean Lloyd, he was sentenced in January 2006 to 2.5 years. And now, 7 years on, he's still in prison.
Yes.
And last year, was it, when he was allowed out for a short period of time, he absconded. And that's the danger of the frustration that I mentioned. Frances Crook, she's the chief executive of the Howard League, and she had an example, a similar example to Sean's, where a lad was in prison for 4 months. And shortly before he was due out, he was allowed out on leave, normal sort of thing, but he was told not to go into a pub. He didn't go into a pub, but with his lunch at home, they had a glass of beer. He was breathalyzed when he went back, and he had all his rights to come out rescinded. 9 years on, he's still in prison.
Oh, you're joking.
No, I mean, that is a very graphic case of the sort of thing I was talking about.
Yeah. So, do you think this should be a priority for politicians going back to Parliament?
Well, obviously, in Parliament, there are many priorities on different agendas, and balancing one against another isn't all that a productive way of looking at it. But I have no doubt this has to be on the agenda. And having failed to get any sense out of government departments over the best part of 12 months now, since the legislation was before Parliament for the changes, now there has to be pressure for action. And I certainly intend to do that, and I know many other colleagues will be doing so as well.
Okay, then. Well, Lord Weekly, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that was Lord Wigley there, and before that we had Jenny Rathbone. Now I'm joined in the studio by Shirley DeBona. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think particularly when you were listening back to yourself, you were getting a little bit emotional there.
Yeah, I do get emotional because, as I said, the one thing I picked up on most was when I say the years go by and the years go by, and then it gets to me, because I still don't know how many more years are to come.
Mm-hmm. So when we spoke a few weeks ago when we recorded that, and I think Sean was still in Cardiff at the time, but you thought he was going to be moved somewhere. Has he been moved?
Yeah, they moved Sean to Dorset some weeks back. Obviously I can't get to Dorset, that's just a million miles away again. Yes. So he hasn't had no visits, just letters since he's been there. He's fine, he's in good spirits there. He's just getting his head around getting out now, just getting his head around getting to parole, which they've already pushed the goalpost back already. He should be having a parole in November. We haven't had a date yet, and if we haven't had a date now, we're not going to get one until after the new year, so they've moved them again.
Right, okay. So, I mean, how is he in himself? Do you get to speak to him on the phone as you can't get down to visit?
Now and again I speak to him on the phone. One of my arguments have been I don't have a landline, I have a mobile phone. So when inmates phone family back home and they have to ring a mobile, they use all their money up very quickly. And I think there should be something put in place so these inmates can phone home knowing they're not going to run out of time. They use all their money. Like I sent Sean £20 a fortnight so as he can get talk time and stamps and envelopes to keep in contact with me. Now he's far away. But when he phones me, I only get one phone call off him because he just can't afford the phone calls. I can't afford to be sending him the money. So that's a bit of a nightmare. There needs to be something changed there. Yeah.
Is he going to be down in Dorset for long?
Pardon?
Is he going to be down in Dorset for long, do you know?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. It's going to be long, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically he's down there in prison by himself with not much hope of a visit?
He's not going to get no visits. He's too far away for the visits. I'm not well enough myself. I mean, I've got my own illnesses, which the whole IPP sentence has caused my illnesses, both mentally and physically. And there's no way I can get there. There's no way anybody else can get there. People are working. They can't take days off work to go and visit him and stuff like that. Where if he would have been in Cardiff, it would have been okay. I don't know why they moved him, knowing there's a potential parole coming up so soon. Even though I know the goalposts have been knocked back. Did they know that? I don't know, because they moved him anyway.
So, talking about parole, you say you haven't got a date yet. What actually happens at the parole when he does get his next parole hearing?
I think I know, and Sean knows, we've got our head round it. He's not going to get his next parole because he absconded. So they're going to look at that as a big breach of prison rules. He knows he broke the rules. How can he mend it? He can't turn the clock back. He wasn't thinking when he did it at the time. He didn't plan on absconding. If he was going to plan it, he would have absconded when he was on a day release or a home leave. He actually left the prison 9 o'clock at night because of the bullying that was going on that I'd explained earlier in my interview. Yeah. Going back to what Lord Wigley said earlier, when he said there's people committing suicide on IPP sentences, can I say that along the years, Sean have made friends in prison with other inmates, obviously, and along the years, 3 inmates that he've known in prison have committed suicide. 2 of those that committed suicide were recalled back to prison for a trivial reason, like being late for probation when they were released after, say, 8 years. 8 years of a 2.5-year sentence, like Sean, released, late for their probation for 5 minutes and being recalled. And that's happened twice in that case. And another one committed suicide. He'd actually overdosed, took a drugs overdose within the prison system.
Which shouldn't be. He shouldn't be able to do that, should he?
No, exactly. Most of the drugs get in the prison system not because inmates' families are taking them into the system. It's well known that it's prison officers taking drugs into the prison system, because there's a lot of money to be made in prison on drugs. They can make more money on selling a tablet in prison than on the outside. That is a fact as well.
Yeah. Right, going back to the parole though, if and when Sean goes to the parole board and they say yes, you can be released, what happens then?
If and when Sean was ever released from prison, Sean will then be on a life licence. It was only last week I spoke to Sean's probation officer that told me that they are going to make a plan for Sean for the rest of his life. That in itself I don't think is fair. OK, keep an eye on him, you have to, you'll be on probation for X amount of time, but for someone else to plan your future for the rest of your life, then they're not going to let Sean forget the crime that he ever committed. If he wants to move on, he's not going to be allowed to. So I disagree with the life licence. I think it needs to be lowered.
I mean, there are going to be people out there who are going to say, well, yeah, maybe he should be reminded for the rest of his life that he committed a crime. OK, he's always going to remember what he did. It's never going to leave his head. It's always going to be there, what he did. Till the day he dies, it's going to be there. But he still needs to get on with the rest of his life, and he doesn't need reminding what he did. How can he get on with the rest of his life if somebody is going to be over his shoulder saying to him, remember, Sean, when you did this when you were 18 years of age? No, he's got to be allowed to get on with his life. Then he's proven that he's rehabilitated, he's getting on with the rest of his life, put it behind him, and let other people let him get on with his life. And you know, it could be that maybe 20 years down the line he gets picked up for, I don't know, a traffic violation, or, you know, taking a wee in a public place. I mean, how many men out there do that?
Exactly. I dare to ask the question. People from all walks of life have peed in a bush. If Sean, say, did the same thing, weed in a bush, and he was caught, Sean is recalled back to prison. He's not charged. He's took straight back to prison, never knowing when his parole's going to be, never knowing again when he'll be out. The problem is when IPP prisoners are recalled to prison, they're going to find it very difficult to get out again. Yeah.
Now, you've actually, I'm not sure it's yourself or part of your campaign, that you have got a protest taking place on Tuesday, the 1st of October.
We've organised a protest outside the Welsh Assembly down Cardiff Bay from 10 o'clock in the morning onwards. I've got a written letter and a petition. I'm hoping I can give that to Carwyn Jones, because I want Carwyn Jones to write to the government and ask the government to help us progress through this campaign. We've got flyers to hand out and stuff, so I'm hoping if there's anyone out there got someone serving an IPP or got friends or neighbours serving an IPP, please come down to Cardiff Bay and back us up. You heard Lord Wigley say, now we need to put the pressure on, and if we don't put the pressure on now, within the next couple of weeks, all this will be brushed under the carpet again. So please come and support us in our campaign.
Absolutely. And what do you hope to achieve from your campaign? Obviously you want to get Sean out of prison, but is it wider than that?
And what we need to achieve down Cardiff Bay on the 1st of October, that's Tuesday, is to get some news teams there, get somebody there to get this more national, because at the moment it's only the people of Cardiff listening to me. I need the people of Wales, I need the whole people of the UK to listen to our campaigns and let people out there know there's 6,500 people locked up, and most of them, as Lord Wigley said, the majority of them are locked up for the most trivial crimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, we're almost running out of time, but we have. I'm going to let you introduce the track actually that Sean really loves.
Can I ask you to play Everything I Own, please?
Okay, and we've got this by Ken Booth. So this is
Yeah,
going
me and
out.
Sean, we used to play it. I used to play the reggae music when all the kids were young, and Sean lived that song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so it reminds me of him.
Absolutely. And don't forget, Tuesday, 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock, the 1st of October, heads for Cardiff Bay. If you want to help your IPP, please come and get there and do it.
Excellent. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
You sheltered me from harm, kept me warm, kept me warm. You gave my life to me, set me free, set me free.
Okay then, well, summing up, obviously, if someone commits a crime, there needs to be consequences for that action. That goes without saying, be it prison or some sort of community payback. But in whose interest is it really to keep people in prison for years after they have completed their original tariff? Now, even if you look at this from a financial point of view, taking the example of the man that was given 71-day sentence, that's just over 2 months, that's 2 months and 10 days. He is still in prison 5 years later. That's 30 times the original sentence he was given. That's 30 times it. Now, it costs £40,000 a year to keep him in prison. That's cost us, the taxpayers, over nearly £200,000 to keep that man in prison. For what? But, you know, we are supposed to be a civilised society. Prisoners are people like you and me. They're not numbers. They're not statistics. They have the same feelings, emotions, fears as you and me. And so put yourself in their position. How would you feel? Or even put yourself in the position of the prison officers, knowing that they have the power over your life, that you need their say-so, their good report to be able to get released on parole. And all because of, and I'm quoting AM Jenny Rathbone here, a piece of bad legislation. Please support Shirley and the thousands of other mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters and children in their campaign to right this legal limbo affecting so many people's lives. That's down at the Cardiff Bay on Tuesday the 1st of October from 10 a.m. Now, they say that justice is blind. Is this justice? I'll let you decide.
You're listening to the news, views, interviews on Radio Cardiff, yeah!
The sound of the capital city, Radio Cardiff.